With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So welcome to our study of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities. And I'll just sort of briefly go, the good thing about even though I showed up a bit late here, and I was actually teaching in the other class, and I'll upload this to the recording anyway, that section. But I used a lot of time going over what we covered last time. So in that sense, it hasn't been a complete waste, but I just apologize for those who would have come here, not found me there, and then left again. And I'd also like to thank all of you who've been patiently waiting. So anyway, we're presently in the 9th chapter of Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's commentary, or Omniscient Jigme Lingpa's Treasury of Precious Qualities. And in here, we're looking at the trainings that accompany the Bodhisattva vow. And that's where we're presently looking at, among the two kinds of bodhicitta, the two kinds of relative bodhicitta, the bodhicitta of aspiration and the bodhicitta of application. We're presently looking at the bodhicitta of application. And in there, we're looking at 4 key ingredients to cultivating this bodhicitta of aspiration. We've looked at the faults, what we don't want to be doing. This is about what we should be doing. And that's where we begin with first practicing or cultivating the attitude of wishing to take the suffering of others and give them all one's goodness. And this is the practice of Tonglen that many of you are familiar with. And then we're looking at 7 things that actually are essential in terms of practically generating the attitude of bodhicitta. And that's where we begin with recognizing all beings have been one's mother. We looked at that last time to quite some extent, and to reflect on their kindness, what they've done. And this doesn't just mean that we sort of take an attitude that we should be kind, but it's actually the practice of sitting and contemplating. And many of us, of course, have issues with that, and we discussed that last time. But the teaching in itself does encourage us then to simply reflect on how much we have received. And then we proceed then to the present discussion, which will be about gratitude, feelings of warmth, and tender compassion towards others. So that's where in the root text it reads here in number 15, we should now recall that all beings without end, when they became our mothers, helped and showed us perfect kindness. If we remember this, our love, compassion, joy, and equanimity will grow. All those who know that beings have been kind, who feel gratitude to them, will be endowed with sublime riches. So this is where, on the basis of reflecting on the kindness of our of all mother sentient beings, then we develop this boundless attitude, and it's boundless because its object is boundless. All sentient beings. That's all sentient beings is like saying, where does the universe end? And that's where then we speak about these as being boundless in the sense of every sentient being is the object of our love, our compassion, our joy, and equanimity. These 4 boundless attitudes, they sort of are basic to how we interact and see others. And that's where, on the basis of that, we then develop these bodhisattva qualities, the 7 sublime riches. So Kangyur Rinpoche, he then says, thus we should reflect that all sentient beings, without exception, have been our mothers many times. They have helped us and shown us intense kindness in ways that no other person should. Reflecting on this again and again, we should acknowledge the fact that every single being we meet has been kind to us. This is radical. And while it's radical, it's actually really good. It's a very nice thing to be equipped with. Of course, it's not always easy, but it's basically operating from that place of giving others the benefit of the doubt, of recognizing the fundamental condition is good. Our fundamental relationship, and we're just talking on a very practical, relative level. Our relationship is one of, meeting somebody is finding our own parents again. By the way, and this is not entirely unrelated, but still, it's a complete aside. I would very much like you to look into the fact that Woolston Fletcher is going to be teaching the Madhyamika Alamkara. And as many of you will know, and I'm happy to find out I'm not the only one, we have an incredible resource in Woolston Fletcher's teachings. He's going to be teaching the Madhyamika Alamkara, which is an incredibly important work, particularly for us who practice Vajrayana, and seeing how the foundations of what we are doing in terms of simply just looking at reality, and that's what Madhyamika does. But Madhyamika also looks at the qualities, the luminous qualities that arise in this, the quality of the middle way, the emptiness. And so Wilson will be commenting on Jamgon Mipham's Madhyamika Alamkara. And please look up and join this. It should be, you can go to maitrikara.co.org. I'll put it in the chat. But I just wanted to say this, and I'm saying it now because I remember listening to Woolston, and he was describing how when he arrives in England at Euston Station, Woolston normally lives in France, but when he goes to England, he takes a train from Euston Station, and that's where he looks at all the people standing there in the hall, and just looking up at the departure sort of screens or whatever, and everybody there is actually related. We should actually think of them as our brothers and sisters, and we're related. They have been our parents, and this kind of way of beginning to look at the others in our lives is radical. So that's where we don't just think of them in terms of we're actually connected, but we also think of them in terms of gratitude and wishing to repay their kindness. So that's where point 3 then, to have a sense of gratitude. And Kangyur Rinpoche says we should therefore endeavor to help others in every way we can, thinking constantly how we might be of service to them in order to repay the great goodness they have shown us. So we owe them. And then to generate feelings of warmth by accustoming ourselves to the way of thinking, we will stop, or rather to this way of thinking. With this attitude, we will stop reacting angrily when we come across unpleasant and hostile people. On the contrary, we will feel sincere love for them, wishing them to be happy and feeling the affection for them that a mother has for her child. Now then you might go, well, hey, there's a lot of really awful people doing awful things. And that's where you have to be like a parent. There's 2 kids that are fighting in the sandbox, right? They're sitting pulling each other's hair. If you don't let go, I won't let go, sort of scenario, right? And that's where this is actually what happens when we look at wars, conflicts, and so on. And that's where a parent will just do anything to sort of try what you can do, but they won't react angrily. And that's the point. When we have awful people, we don't react angrily. We simply understand that there's a toxic thing going on in their heads, just like a parent won't get angry at the kids. They'll just sort of say, what can we do to get these guys apart, So that sort of absence of anger enables us to actually be much more effective. Now, unless you're working as a mediator for the United Nations, you're probably not going to be able to go in and help resolve the international conflicts that we often are exposed to in the media, and we think, oh, this is where I should be doing something. Or if I'm a Buddhist, does that mean I don't do anything for other people? That's not the point. You should. And it's not then about going in and solving international conflicts. It's about relating to what's happening in your own household. again, I have to come back to a famous, this is often quoted among Trungpa Rinpoche's students. But Trungpa Rinpoche, he was sitting with a group of people, and this was the early 70s, right? He was sitting with a group of his students, and one of the students asked, Rinpoche, what do you think about the aggression? What do you think about the US government and the aggression, the US government's aggression in the war in Vietnam? And Trungpa Rinpoche says, I'm more concerned about the aggression in this room, which is an important anecdote because, little vignette, because that's where we need to do. Okay, if you are an international negotiator, well, then yes. But otherwise, it's about actually relating in a nice way to your landlord, to your spouse, to your kids, to your parents, to the neighbor, to the people we work for, and so forth. And there's constant challenges. There's no lacking of these. There's no lacking of opportunities to practice. So that's where this message that we're talking about here, our connection, the gratitude, the repaying, the not reacting angrily, all that is hugely applicable at a very immediate level. You can't walk away from this class and say, oh, that's a very nice teaching. How do we apply this in everyday life? This is everyday life. There's nothing in this that doesn't have to do with everyday life. And that goes for every teaching we actually have. So we feel sincere love for them, wishing them to be happy and feeling the affection for them that a mother has for her child. To have tender compassion. From such a feeling of love, a boundless sense of compassion will naturally arise. Okay, so we always have these two together. First, you have this caring, sympathy, love, basically, maitri, loving kindness. And there, within that, then you have the wish that they don't suffer. You want them to be happy, and as a result, you don't want them to suffer. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, and on seeing the objects of our love, meaning others, acting in negative ways that will lead them into suffering, we will have an unbearable longing to free them. And this is interesting. They're not talking about having compassion for beings that are suffering necessarily, which of course we have, but we're also having compassion for those that are perpetrating the causes of suffering. And that's where you might look at cruel persons. You might look at you might look at somebody who creates so much trouble and so much pain for others. And that's where you think this person is really bad, and I want to have, and I feel compassion for those to whom this person or these people are inflicting suffering. You know, I hate those people who are creating suffering for those people, right? We hear that a lot, especially with our exposure to media, right? But that's where there's a radical thought here also here, because we're also having sympathy for those that are creating the causes for their own future suffering. And that's such an important point. We have that in the famous story of the Bodhisattva who took out this person that intended to kill a large number of merchants. And that's where, again, the famous story that I often quote, Paltra Rinpoche's students, they were hugely angry at a hunter who was pursuing this deer. And Paltra Rinpoche says, you know, you should have compassion for the hunter. He's the one who's creating causes for future suffering. Then Kangyur Rinpoche says, at the same time, when we see that others are prosperous and happy, we ourselves will have a great joy, greater than if the good fortune were happening to ourselves. Sympathetic joy. We're happy when others are happy. We will perceive the essential equality of beings and approach them with an impartiality that annihilates the distinctions between those that are close and those that are distant, uprooting favoritism and dislike accordingly. It is thus that the four boundless attitudes develop and intensify. So there's just in these 4 lines, we have a summary of how we apply the 4 boundless attitudes. We feel kindness, we feel compassion, we feel sympathetic joy, and we feel this equally for all beings, free from this sort of, oh, these people are close to me, I like them, you know, and I don't like those people, you know. And that's essentially favoritism and dislike, right? So this is immensely relevant, and that's why you could say, when it comes to the bodhicitta of aspiration, what really is an essential aspect of that are these four boundless. We looked at them separately in a different chapter, but these are essentials, and we have them everywhere. 6, then, to gain the extraordinary attitude. In this way, our mind becomes imbued with these four boundless attitudes. As our minds become imbued with these four boundless attitudes, we will find that others have become dear to us and they become the focus of our compassion. And we will experience a deep sense that we ourselves are responsible for establishing them in a state of permanent happiness and freedom. So that's where it's up to us. Of course, it would be nice if the government looks after those who are suffering. If there's institutions that can do it, it's nice when others can do it and so on. But we can't really be responsible for whether or not the government or other people are looking after others, unless, of course, we might have some influence of one kind or another, but sitting around sort of like just being upset with the government because they're not doling out the necessary support in time, unless we can really do about it, it's not really going to do much. What really actually, again, comes down to is essentially what we would call charity begins at home, that we ourselves should actually think, I'm the one. And that's where it has a ripple effect. I here, with me in my particular situation, I need to be the one who's taking responsibility for establishing others in happiness and freedom at a very domestic level, but also, of course, in terms of the whole practice of the path. We can't expand our minds wide enough to actually embrace or fully comprehend the immensity of the Bodhisattva project, which is forever to always be at the service for others, to sort of re-rig our own mind so that it thinks in those terms, is an enormous project. And obviously the only project that ever really is worthwhile. Everything else is ultimately going to be a cause of suffering. It's only when we develop this kind of attitude that we're really connecting with what is real. And that, of course, here presently, we're talking in terms of relative bodhicitta. We're talking in terms of the others. Of course, what defines absolute bodhicitta is the falling away of this notion of self and other. But that's where we organically then are able to benefit far more, because we're not thinking in terms of me versus the other, us versus them, and so forth. So that's where the issue of the enormity falls away, and it simply just becomes an organic, natural, a natural process. The unsurpassable fruit. People who have this attitude and act accordingly, who reflect that all beings have been their mothers and feel gratitude to them, will naturally be endowed with the 7 sublime riches of faith and so forth. So as far as I remember, then you have faith, discipline, generosity, meditation. No, sorry, it's faith, generosity, faith, discipline, generosity, learning, shame, decorum, and wisdom, prajna. So these are referred to as the 7 riches of the Bodhisattva, the 7 sublime riches of the Bodhisattva. And persons who have cultivated the above then will gain will have this quality, and they will proceed to enlightenment. And that is then, or rather, they will proceed then to have this bodhicitta of aspiration that we presently are talking about. The unparalleled fruit is to aspire to enlightenment for the sake of others. So that is how we define the bodhicitta of aspiration. So this was the second. Then we have the third precept, the 4 black and the 4 white factors. And these again are very immediate. then, you know, we can say, oh gosh, there's so many whites and blacks and for this and for that, but they all have a place in our lives. They all have a place in our discipline. He says the mind that Kangyur Rinpoche says let me just see, did I need to, yeah, 16, hold on, let's have the root text. Aspiration bodhicitta is resplendent like the autumn moon, but perils worse than Rahu's face in dangerous, 4 devils to be driven far away. So there's nothing greater than the cooling moon, cooling autumn moon of bodhicitta. And in India, the moon is associated with relief. You have some pretty hot days, and when the moon is up, it cools us. The moon is actually said to have medicinal properties for the eyes also. It's said that to gaze at the, if you meet a Tibetan doctor, there might be some issues with your eyes that you might be prescribed to actually gaze at the full moon. But that's where this bodhicitta is threatened by some great perils. And the image is Rahu, who in Indian cosmology, as there's an eclipse of the moon, then we see the moon disappear. This is in the classical Indian cosmology, and the Tibetans adopted. This is then seen to be the great demon Rahu that is chewing up the moon. And this is actually very real. I remember when I lived in Nepal, when there was a lunar eclipse, and I lived around the Bodhnath Stupa for quite some time. Everybody would be doing chorus, circumambulations all nights. And I remember once with Jakob Rinpoche, we would sit up all night chanting Vajraguru mantra. Rinpoche, he wouldn't allow us to go to sleep. We all stayed up, Rinpoche himself also, sitting up all night chanting Vajraguru mantra during lunar eclipse. So this is seen as being something where everybody feels that something terrible is happening. Now, it doesn't really matter whether or not this is actually taking place, but it's more just that there is some sense of us facing something that's difficult and something can be done about it. And that's where these 4 evils that then can be remedied. There's something that needs to be done. So that's where then Kangyur Rinpoche says the mind that aspires to enlightenment is characterized by the excellent attitude of not rejecting anyone. It shines its light impartially on all, like the bright moon of autumn. 4 black factors militate against this attitude, however, and are able to obscure it worse than the face of Rahu. Antidotes must be used to drive them far away. The 4 factors are as follows. Let's see what the translators have to say about that. The demon in Indian mythology who periodically swallowing the sun and the moon is responsible for eclipses. So that's Rahu. Okay, so let's look at what they are. 17. These evils are to mislead people worthy of respect, to bring regret and doubt to those who practice virtue, to slander holy beings, speaking ill of them, to trick and swindle others, leading them astray. So here we have 4 things that we really, and they're very, you can say it's pretty, you can actually understand why these are difficult. To mislead and deceive those who are worthy objects of homage, teachers, spiritual masters, abbots and monks, and all who possess true spiritual qualities. So notice true spiritual qualities, right? We're not just talking about authorities in the classical sense or in the modern sense of the words, which very often, authorities are very often institutions that we choose to doubt, question, challenge, and so forth. But here we're talking about those that have true spiritual qualities, who are really good people. And we have that also. When there are good people, we treat them with respect. And here we're not just talking about good people, but actually persons who really are possessing genuine compassion and wisdom, teachers and so forth. That's where we don't lie to them. And that's where we're simply talking about, we're going to the teacher and either we say ridiculous things like, I have a deep realization, Or maybe we just mislead them, or we might not succeed in misleading them, but we might ourselves intentionally be lying, be untruthful. So that's where it is really bad to be untruthful to one's teacher. This probably makes perfect sense. To place doubt and anxiety in the minds of people accumulating merit tending to happiness, or to have entered any of the three vehicles of the Dharma and accumulating merit tending to liberation. One does this when, for example, one tells them that they have not received the vows authentically, or that the teaching they are practicing are bogus and inauthentic. And this obviously happens, that we might sometimes we might actually look down on people who are just being virtuous, very simple-minded, without any idea of being on a path to enlightenment or anything, but simply just who want to be happy. And for that reason, they engaged in whatever it might be. It might be, things that we don't think of as necessarily that significant. They might just be charities or bake sales, or just being a goody two-shoes of one sort or another, and we make fun of them. Actually, people want to be goody two-shoes, and this could very often result in at least not harming anybody, and possibly making people better people, happier people. And then those who are on the path of Dharma, then it's really important that one doesn't remove their faith in what they're doing. Now, this is tricky, because you will obviously come across people who might be following, guides that we think, well, this is a ridiculous guide. But that's not up to us. And that's where, if these people have faith in someone who appears to be a negative guide, so be it. It's not our job to sort of to yank them out of that. But again, it is tricky, because you do sometimes come across people who are seriously suffering from following, perverse gurus and so forth. So that's where it really is tricky. But that's where we should be very sensitive to this. And that's where we then have this just awareness about the difficulty with giving other people doubt or anxiety about what they're doing. Then there's to criticize superior beings openly and to denigrate those who have truly generated the attitude of bodhicitta, spreading rumors behind their backs. That's again where we need to be so sensitive, because we really don't know who is a bodhisattva, who really is doing something with a good motivation. And that's where we can't gauge this on the basis of just looking at people externally. The value of an action, the karmic value of an action, is completely dependent on the motivation behind. So it's not the action in itself, but it's the motivation. And that's where we might find teachers, or we might find individuals who really are genuinely superior beings. And then we look at their actions, and they don't correspond to what we think should be how bodhicitta should be practiced. And then we begin to be critical and spread rumors or talk badly about them. This is difficult. That's where we have to be so careful. And then to deceive others by hiding one's faults and laying claim to qualities one does not possess, and to cheat others through any kind of sharp practice. So that's where, again, simply just being a fraud, pretending, I have this realization, I'm so on. And Kangyur Rinpoche very often actually brings out the Tibetan practice of self-denigration, and even us who are students of him are sometimes even encouraged to actually pretend to be humble, even if we're not. But that's where, again, it's tricky. But the bottom line is, we should be honest about our faults. And in some way, we have great examples in people like Kangyur Rinpoche and other great teachers who almost, all the time expose or claim to expose their shortcomings, who will say, well, I'm sort of a confused person like myself, useless person like myself. And this is great teachers who will say this about themselves. And, Kangyur Rinpoche, who would refer to himself as an old dog, or, You know, I've seen writings by Dingo-chen's Rinpoche, you know, just talking about himself as being a useless old, you know, a useless old man, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we have actually some good examples of how to practice humility. And we certainly should stay far away from this sort of embarrassing practice of trying to either sort of directly say, I have great realization, or kind of imply it, you know, kind of imply that I have some authority, I have something, you know, I've got something going spiritually. And that's where this kind of like deceptive practice is really so bad. Now it says here the word sharp practice, and I've actually never come across that. I'm thinking it refers to deceptive practice, but when I looked it up, it sort of was more about cutting and unkindness. Now, there might be somebody in the audience who is better versed in English. I know some of you have been English teachers, so I don't know if any of you have come across this expression, sharp practice, as seeming to indicate deception of some sort. I don't know. Anyway, I think the meaning hopefully is pretty clear, right? Yeah. Okay. So then 18, to harbor any of these four will lead to a loss of aspiration bodhicitta. For if we fail to feel remorse and to apply the antidotes, and if the time of reparation is allowed to pass, then indeed is bodhicitta lost. So we looked at this earlier, how we can lose our, you could say, vows. And that's where it's so important that if we stumble on the path, which inevitably we will, then at least we're aware of it and we do something to amend it, to repair it. And that's where we have the various practices that we refer to as confession and amendment. So if we're Vajrayana practitioners, this is what we do when we practice Sok. And that's where it needs to be actually practiced seriously, even though very often when it comes to Sok, then we're usually concerned about who's doing what and so on. But it's really the place to set things straight. And in general, in the Mahayana, we have practices such as the practice of the 35 Buddha confession and so forth. But that's where Kangyur Rinpoche says, the presence of any of these faults will lead to the loss of aspiration bodhicitta. If one fails to confess the fault with a powerful sense of remorse, if the antidotes are not applied, whether at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the period in which the fault occurs, and if the time limit for confessioning is exceeded, bodhicitta is lost. So if we really let this negativity that we've just described here in the above take hold of us, and that could happen. That's where we just then lose our bodhicitta. Now, the good thing about the bodhicitta vow is that it can be repaired. And that's, again, even though we have been awful persons for a very long time and so on, then we could take the bodhicitta vow again. And this also is something that we can do personally. We have, in every practice in Tibetan Buddhism, we have pretty much every practice, we have the taking refuge and then developing bodhicitta. Hey, are there any questions? You can put up your hand. See if I can see it there. Or you can write something in the chat box. We're going to go on to the 4 white factors, but we only have about 5 minutes left. Yeah, okay. Veronica, let's see here.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Let me actually just cut the screen, then we can see you. Okay, good. Yeah, go ahead.
Wonderful. Okay. I just I wanted
You want to see the text?
Written in the text again. Yes, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Let's see here. Yeah.
There was something about the time limit. Yeah, the time limit for confession exceeded. That makes me think of the difficulty of, you know, when we're supposed to do confessions on things of previous lives or things we don't remember at all. Could you say something about that?
Well, the the good thing about the Bodhisattva vow is that we can retake it. You know, it's not like it's gone. When we say here it's gone, it's lost, but we can retake it. And that's where whenever you do your Lundo practice, then it'll be in there, the taking of the Bodhisattva vow. And of course, we also do it in a formal context when there's a great teacher, a sublime being who gives the Bodhisattva vows. But it's something that we're aware of. And of course, there are, you could say, aspects to this that will affect us heavily. But that's where we practice Vajrasattva. And that's where we do the practice of the regret, and we do it in front of somebody. We are determined to not do it again, and then we stick to that. So we say one thing that you should take with you now. That is, there's never a negative action that cannot be purified. So you're good. What we're talking about here are really just to be aware of the, you could say, the ramifications of actions. And that's where we then need to appreciate the value of this kind of repairing practice. And it's also, of course, I always go over that, but it is important that we really don't associate it with the negative discourse we have around confession in the modern context. Because confession in a modern context usually is associated with constructing yourself as an ultimately negative person or a sinful person. You know, the way it's represented in movies and in how people talk about that, you know, the confession booth. It's not something that's taken terribly serious in the modern world. And that's where what we need to be aware of, actually, how this actually is hugely helpful. You know, because otherwise, very often it's like, okay, I've done something wrong. And then we just say, well, move on, you know, don't feel guilty. But we do feel guilty. And that's where it's, the guilt is actually an expression of sanity, that we actually see, hey, that really wasn't great. And, you know, the more we can actually say, hey, that was really bad what I did, the more we're actually free from it. The more that we try to justify it to ourselves, then the more we're actually stuck with it. So confession is an extremely practical, liberating practice. But that's where these four powers are so important: the power of regret, the power of witness, the power of determination or vow, and then the application of it. And that's, again, here, when we talk about some of these vows, we would talk about, for example, if you're a monk or a nun and you break your celibacy vow, yeah, then that's kind of it. Then it's that's pretty bad, because it's all about the behavior. Whereas in the case of the Bodhisattva vow, that's more at the level of the individual disposition, the mind. And that's where we would say, it's not as if it's ultimately broken. We can put it together again. So that's where the not all is lost, put it that way. Yeah. Any other questions? So, yeah. Yeah. Do you have another question, Veronica? Yes, go ahead. That's good.
Yes, I actually have two more questions. One very simple one, because I'm jumping into this course like in the middle. It's a very basic one. I got to understand that Treasury of Precious Qualities, there are actually 2 books and not just one. So my question is, are you doing commenting both, and what is the difference between? I don't have any of them yet. That's a simple question.
The second one I won't be doing. And that's because there's a little bit of sort of a practice of leaving that to persons who have a lot of qualifications. And so this is typically, we would say it should be a Vajra master who does that. And that's where we would leave this to sublime beings. You know, so that's where, when I did the Finding Rest in the Nature of Mind, I did the first 8 chapters. When we come up to the Vajrayana, I left it at that. And similarly, also, volume 1 here is about the Sutrayana. It's about the path which we can understand with a rational mind. When we go into the Vajrayana, it's actually premised on some degree of experience of co-emergent wisdom. and actually being fully engaged and identified with the path in a way that goes beyond, you could say, the rationality of the sutra path. And that's where then the Vajrayana operates with its own incredible science, or its own incredible logic that goes beyond ordinary experience. And that's where you then need somebody who's either incredibly learned or supremely realized. So that's where the first volume of the Treasury of Precious Qualities is all about the sutra teachings. Volume 2 is all about the mantra teachings.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and you had one more.
Yes, and the other one, I just realized in today's explanation, there was much focus on gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been wondering since the beginning, so I am really, really new. But I've been wondering many times why we don't find gratitude as a kind of separate category, of things to develop, or I don't know. And the reason I ask is for myself, I feel much more connected with gratitude very strongly than with the notion of love. And I was wondering, is it just me using the wrong term? Is there actually no difference between those two? Or is there a difference? And if yes, what is the difference? I've been wondering, why isn't there big chapters on, gratitude instead of love, or in addition?
It's true. It's true. Another one that's really big is forgiveness, right? Yeah, forgiveness is also big. All of these, you're right. You're totally right. But that's also why it does come in here. It is talked about. It is something. Gratitude is something, but it's linked together with this overall sense of connection with others. So all of it it really all is just different aspects of the same thing. And it is love here, of course, means more than just fascination with somebody. It goes much further because it is about all sentient beings. And that's again, how do we then develop such love and boundless compassion, sympathetic joy, and so on? Well, partly on the basis of gratitude. So gratitude is very important. It's sort of, here we have them, I mean, this is the place where we find gratitude, and the wish to then do something, So that's where the gratitude is big. So if you feel that gratitude is big, then you're in the right place. And, it's not you should say, oh yeah, gratitude, that's just a sort of a secondary quality, but it's really big. It's really, really big. And I mean, it's also very much up to us to say, hey, I connect with gratitude. I'm going to make that my main sort of skillful means for generating the bodhicitta of aspiration. For others, it could be, just, oh, I feel deeply indebted. I feel immensely guilty that I'm not serving my old mothers better than I am. So that's where guilt can become a really good vehicle. Tsonsa Khyentse very often jokes about that, right? And any of these things that we're discussing here, they all, connect with something that is very real and immediate for us. So that's where we should just simply practice whatever it is that really, you could say, does it for us. Yeah. Any others? Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. Well, look, we've sort of come to the end of the hour. Once again, apology for my showing up late. This is just the beginning of my dementia. This is old age. You can expect more of this as time goes by. Have compassion for the old, for the old dude. Okay, we'll complete with dedication. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Actually, did you guys see, could you see no, you couldn't see it, right? Stop sharing. Oh, well. Could you see the dedication prayer here at the end?
No, we couldn't know.
I'm losing it. Huh?
We could hear.
Please keep me in your prayers. I'll keep you in mind. So we'll help each other. We'll manage. Take care.
Take care. Thank you, Jakob.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye for now.